On May 1st, 1648, an Ottoman army under Ghazi Hussein Pasha arrived at the city of Candia, the capital of Venetian Crete. Their arrival kicked off a war of attrition on a truly epic scale, a siege that would grind on for an astonishing 21 years. An entire generation would be born, live, and die in the shadow of this struggle. By some measures, it's the longest single siege in recorded history, a brutal contest of endurance, innovation, and suffering. This is the story of that staggering conflict, where two empires bled themselves dry for control of a single city, and where the brutal realities of gunpowder warfare were pushed to their absolute limit. In the mid-17th century, the Mediterranean was a fractured sea of competing powers. The Republic of Venice, once the unrivaled queen of the seas, could feel its power fading. After losing Cyprus in 1571, the island of Crete, which the Venetians called the Kingdom of Candia, was their last, most prized overseas possession. It was a vital trade hub and a strategic fortress standing against the rising power in the east, the Ottoman Empire. For decades, a tense peace held. The Venetians trod carefully, knowing their military was a shadow of its former self, and their economy depended on the very trade the Ottomans could choke off at any moment. They went out of their way to avoid provoking the Sultan. But that fragile peace was about to be shattered, not by Venice or the Ottomans, but by a third party, the Knights of Malta. In September 1644, the Knights, who often operated as state-sanctioned pirates against Ottoman shipping, attacked a high-value convoy sailing from Constantinople to Alexandria. On board were pilgrims headed to Mecca, including the former chief black eunuch of the Sultan's harem. The attack was a success for the Knights, but a complete catastrophe for Venice. Why? Because on their way back, the Knights briefly docked at a small port on Crete to offload some of their plunder. For the Ottomans, this was the ultimate provocation. They accused the Venetians of collaborating with the Knights, a charge Venice furiously denied. But it was the excuse the war hawks in the Ottoman court were looking for. A massive invasion force of around 60,000 men was assembled, its destination kept a state secret. The Venetians were told the fleet was sailing for Malta, a deliberate deception. But in June 1645, the ruse was dropped. The vast Ottoman army, under the command of Yusuf Pasha, landed on Crete. The Cretan War had begun. The Ottoman landing caught Venice completely off guard. They had sensed trouble and sent some reinforcements, but the island's defenses had been neglected for years. The invaders, led initially by Yusuf Pasha, swept across the island, capturing the key cities of La Canea, Chania, and Rethymno within months. By 1648, nearly all of Crete was under Ottoman control. Only the ultimate prize remained, the capital, Candia. And Candia was a fortress built for a new age of war. Knowing its value, Venice had poured enormous sums into turning it into a defensive masterpiece. The city was protected by a massive, irregular, polygonal wall, with a perimeter of roughly 5 kilometers, designed by Europe's top military engineers. This wasn't some medieval castle. It was a fortress built for the gunpowder age. 7 enormous arrowhead-shaped bastions jutted out from the main wall, their angled faces designed to deflect cannonballs and create deadly, interlocking fields of fire for the defenders. Reinforced with artillery platforms and protected by a deep, dry ditch, it was a fortress designed to be impregnable. Against this stood the full might of the Ottoman war machine. Tens of thousands of soldiers, including the elite janissaries, were deployed, supported by thousands of workers and miners with one purpose: bring the city to its knees. The stage was set. On one side, the pinnacle of defensive engineering and Venetian sea power. On the other, the seemingly limitless manpower of the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman army, now commanded by Ghazi Hussein Pasha, arrived before Candia in May 1648, they expected a quick fight. They surrounded the city, cut off its water supply and began a relentless bombardment. But the walls held. Venetian defenders, led by a series of dogged commanders, met every assault with savage resistance, even sallying from their gates to fight the Ottomans in their own trenches. Years passed. The initial Ottoman strategy of direct assault failed again and again, costing them thousands of lives. The war settled into a brutal, grinding rhythm. On land, the Ottomans were dominant, but at sea, the Venetians had the edge. For years, the Venetian navy blockaded the Dardanelles, the strategic strait connecting the Ottoman capital to the Mediterranean. This choked the flow of supplies and reinforcements to Crete, and even caused food shortages in Constantinople itself. The Ottomans adapted. They built new forts to break the blockade and established new supply routes to their forces on Crete. A bloody stalemate emerged. The Ottomans couldn't take Candia, and the Venetians couldn't break the Ottoman hold on the island. The siege became the new normal. For 16 long years, this pattern held, an endless, hellish cycle of bombardment, naval clashes, and stalemate. As the years stretched into a decade, the warfare at Candia evolved. Unable to go over the walls, both sides went under them. The conflict became a terrifying war of sappers and miners, an unseen battle fought in the dark earth beneath the city's ramparts. Ottoman miners dug a complex maze of tunnels called galleries, inching toward the foundations of the bastions. Their goal was to place huge explosive charges, mines, and shatter the defenses from below. The Venetians, guided by Europe's best engineers, responded with their own network of countermines, listening for the telltale sounds of digging. The fighting in these cramped, lightless passages was the stuff of nightmares. Miners would often break through into an enemy tunnel, leading to desperate, savage brawls with picks, shovels, and daggers in total darkness. Defenders would sometimes detonate their own charges just to collapse the Ottoman galleries, burying the enemy miners alive. Over the course of the siege, dozens of major mines were detonated, shaking the city's very foundations and creating massive craters that would instantly become the site of another bloody assault. Life inside the besieged city was a harrowing ordeal of starvation, disease, and the constant terror of bombardment and underground explosions. In a sign of pure desperation, Venetian commanders even documented a plan for a primitive form of biological warfare, a proposal to contaminate goods with fluids from plague victims, hoping the disease would spread through the Ottoman camp. While the war burrowed underground, it also raged across the Aegean. Venice received aid from other European states like the Knights of Malta, the Papal States, and France, all driven by a mix of religious fervor and a desire to halt Ottoman expansion. Naval battles erupted as Christian fleets tried to destroy the Ottoman navy and deliver vital supplies to the city. Victories were won and lost. Commanders were killed and ships were sunk, but neither side could land a knockout blow. After 2 decades, the tide finally began to turn. In 1664, the Peace of Vasvar ended a separate war between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs, freeing up thousands of veteran troops for the Cretan front. In 1666, a new, ruthlessly determined Ottoman commander, Grand Vizier Ahmed Köprülü, arrived to personally oversee the final phase of the siege. The intensity of the attacks reached a fever pitch, but the final blows to the defense came not from cannon, but from betrayal and disaster. A Venetian military engineer named Andrea Barozzi defected to the Ottomans, giving them detailed intelligence on the fortification's weakest points. In June 1669, a major French relief force arrived, led by the Duc de Beaufort. Hopes soared in the city, but the effort was a catastrophe. During a chaotic night attack on the Ottoman siege lines, the Duc de Beaufort was killed in action. Just weeks later, on July 24th, a horrific accident sealed the city's fate. The French flagship, The 58-gun La Thérèse suffered an accidental powder explosion, destroying itself and damaging nearby ships. This twin disaster shattered the Allies' morale. Defeated and demoralized, the French abandoned the siege in August, leaving the defenders completely alone. The Venetian commander, Francesco Morosini, was left with just 3,600 fit men and dwindling supplies to defend the ruined fortress. The situation was hopeless. The city could not hold out any longer. On September 27, 1669, after 21 years of siege, Francesco Morosini surrendered the city of Candia. The human cost was almost unimaginable. An estimated 30,000 Venetian soldiers and citizens had died, alongside over 100,000 Ottoman troops. The terms of surrender were honorable. The remaining Christian population could leave with whatever they could carry. Venice was allowed to keep 3 small island fortresses off the coast, but the great kingdom of Candia was lost forever. The fall of Candia was a turning point. For the Republic of Venice, it was a devastating blow. The war had emptied its treasury and decimated its nobility, marking the definitive end of its maritime empire in the eastern Mediterranean. Though Morosini would later be hailed as a hero and elected leader of Venice, his decision to surrender without the Senate's approval made him a controversial figure for years. For the Ottoman Empire, the victory came at a staggering price. The immense drain on men and money over 2 decades contributed to the gradual decline that would define its later history. Crete would remain under Ottoman rule until the late 19th century, but the war had been a textbook Pyrrhic victory. The Siege of Candia stands as a horrifying monument to human endurance and the brutal logic of attrition warfare. It was a conflict that consumed a generation, a struggle where the arts of fortification and siegecraft were pushed to their absolute, terrifying limits. It was the last great showdown between Venice and the Ottoman Empire, a war that redrew the map of the Mediterranean and closed a chapter on an entire era of history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button to help the channel grow. And let us know in the comments, what piece of epic history should we tackle next?